buds will certainly find your vulnerability and force you to face it. But ultimately, it is 6 months of hell to see if you can endure what gets thrown at you, just see if you're good enough to be a part of that brotherhood.
For a Brit, or someone who's never heard of buds before, how would you describe it? What is it?
Basic underwater demolition SEAL training, or BUDS for short, is the selection process for Navy SEALs. And it is literally just 6 months of getting your ass kicked, being kept cold, wet, and sandy, and never really having an opportunity to rest. And the focus is first very much physical, which ends up turning into a mental game. And then that just continues with a little bit of education, but really not. Any education you get is just so that it gives them a different way to torture you and drop the hammer and see if you've got what it takes. But ultimately, it is 6 months of hell to see if you can endure what gets thrown at you, see if you're mentally strong enough to deal with, crisis and complicated scenarios, and then and see if you're just see if you're good enough to be a part of that brotherhood.
Was there anything that stood out, like a specific moment in that process for you?
There were a lot of moments that stood out. I mean, 6 months is a long time when every day you're getting your ass handed to you. I think for me, where I had the most anxiety was when it was pull comp, which is a week of underwater stress tests, right? And I think it was exacerbated because of having that childhood experience of borderline lost at sea without a swim buddy and not knowing if I was going to make it home alive, right? And so when that moment came, when I'm underwater, you're on these old Jacques Cousteau rigs, twin 180s on your back, double hose regulator, old school systems. And they do that on purpose because you can pull that out and tie these big whammy knots in the hoses while you're going back and forth along the bottom, right? And while you're going back and forth, you don't know when the attack is coming, but it's coming. And you just keep going back and forth. The instructors are up there circling like sharks, and they're waiting for the right time. And that right time for them is when you exhale and all those bubbles come out. Then those guys come down and they literally beat you underwater, take away your air immediately, pull your mask off your face, tie the hose in a knot, loosen your shoulder straps, chest strap, waist strap, take your weight belt off. It falls immediately onto the bottom of the combat training tank, toss you around, slap you in the head, and then now you have to start solving your problems in a orderly fashion. Because if you get out of order, you fail. So you have no air, and now you have to start putting everything on in a specific order, right? So the first thing you do is get your weight belt. You lay it across the back of your calves so that it keeps you on the bottom. Then you try to find your mask. You get that on, and you're gonna have to clear your mask. But you have no air to clear your mask because you push on the front of your mask, right? Which opens up and loosens the seal around your nose, and you blow out your nose, the bubbles replace the water, and now you can see, right? But wait, you can't do that yet. So you need air first. So then you've got your mask and you're getting everything, you're kind of collecting it up to include your fins. And now you've got to take your rig, put it on over, put your arms through the straps, get your chest strap done. You've untied a knot that's in your rig, of course. You get air. Now you can clear your mask, put your fins on. Anyway, you go through the whole process, and then you just start going back and forth across the bottom again. And meanwhile, they're up there circling like sharks, and then they wait until you exhale again, and they come down and do it again. And they do it to you over and over and over again to see if you're going to quit, to see if you'll bolt to the surface. Because if you take off to the surface, that's considered quitting, right? So the anxiety for that moment to get in the water and start that test was overwhelming for me because I was like, oh my God, I was the part of, that experience when you're a kid to that point. Now I'm an adult, young adult, and I've got to just get through this. And then once I got down there and got going, it just kind of all went away. The anxiety went away. You kind of surrender to them. As soon as you get that first hit in the head, you just kind of go limp and you let them do whatever they want to you. And then you just remember the process. Okay, put this on first, do that second, do that third, and just get through it calmly. At least pretend to be calm, even though inside you're like, I want air, right? And then do it again, do it again, do it again. And before you know it, it's over. And they say, you passed. And you're like, thank God. But that's just one day in buds, right? And every guy has a different day where their anxiety is a little higher than others. And it just really depends on your own personal strengths and weaknesses and vulnerabilities, because buds will certainly find your vulnerability and force you to face it. And then when you face it, it can either take advantage of you or you can take advantage of it, and that's really what it boils down to.
When I've heard people speak about the military training, like at this extreme level, there is the physical side of it, which is, you have to be so fit, so tremendously strong, fast, healthy. But it always seems like it boils down to the mentality and like having that mindset and being able to deal with stressful situations. How much was it for you, mental versus physical?
The principle is that they leverage the physical beatings to ultimately break you down mentally. That's the whole point of the whole process in the military, whether it's a boot camp or when you get to, buds, which is considered one of the toughest selections in the world. They break you down physically, which then inevitably breaks you down mentally and emotionally. And I feel like every guy's probably got a different answer, but for me, the mental aspect of it was where I was strong, because I was physically 150 pound skinny runt. So all I had was this, and so for me, getting through whatever the test was of the day started here and ended here. Where a lot of guys, you had Naval Academy athletes, you have even professional athletes that stop what they're doing to try and become a SEAL. And you're surrounded by some of the greatest athletes in the world that show up to buds to see if they've got what it takes. But for me, I was just a skinny little punk from Texas, but I knew that I at least had this part somewhat squared away, and it ended up being my biggest strength. So for me, it was all started here, ended here, and physically, I was mediocre. I was middle of the running pack. I was at the back of the pack on the swims. I was okay at the obstacle course, and and anything that took that mental aspect was probably the only place I excelled, which there wasn't much of, there's no written exams where I could go, look at how smart I am, There was a couple of tests here and there, but for the most part, it was all physical. So all I had was the mental side.
And what was it like when you finally achieved it, when you got through buds?
Well, one of the unique things about buds is you are constantly kept humble, right? And so for me, graduating buds, there was no like, haha, look at me, right? Look at what I did. It didn't exist, because you knew like, wait, this is just the beginning. Like, I got a long road ahead of me. You've got to get through. For me, I was a medic. So I had to go get through the Army Special Operations Medical School. And I was like, holy shit, that's like one of the hardest schools in the military mentally. I knew that I had to go through advanced SEAL training, which back then was called STT, SEAL Tactical Training. And that's where you actually learn how to be a SEAL, because you don't learn that in buds, right? And then I knew I've got to then check into my SEAL team. And then I'm going to be put into a platoon. And it's the platoon that decides when I get my trident. So I still had a multi-year path to go before I was actually going to put on the symbol that represents Navy SEAL. So when I graduated BUDS, I knew, well, this is just the beginning. I have a whole lot of shit I got to do. And so, you know, there was no real big celebration. Of course, you have a moment when you're like, okay, thank God that's over. But now I got to go start the next stress test, right? And then the next one, and then the next one. So because of that process, most SEALs, I think, are pretty humble in the fact that we have what's called, or what I call, the new guy mentality. You're always a new guy, no matter where you show up, right? There's always somebody more seasoned, someone smarter, faster, stronger. And so the golden rule as a new guy is always volunteer for everything, always come in early, always stay late, and keep your mouth shut. And so I just maintain the new guy mentality, just like everyone else. And as long as you do that, then you're never really going to be in a position where you're pounding your chest and saying, look at what I've accomplished. Boy, I feel great about myself right now. If you don't get yelled at, or if you don't have one of your peers call you out and say that you fucked up, then that was probably a good day, because you're not going to get a pat on the back or get a, hey, good job from your buddies. If you get silence from your buddies after you've done something, then that means you've done it right. That's all you get.
As many of you know, we are independent creators and filmmakers, but there is a massive attack on us right now. Traditional media over the last few years has started to slowly die. They are no longer the independent voice that you first thought they were. That's why we've created Mulligan Brothers Patreon. We've built something special for our most dedicated supporters, and I want to break it down for you real quick. The supporter tier gets you ad-free early access to both video and audio versions of Mulligan Brothers interviews 24 hours before it goes public. The executive tier gets you everything that a supporter tier gets, plus more. Exclusive interviews and behind the scenes content, walk and talks, daily routines, unreleased interviews, the stuff that you don't see anywhere else. And finally, the executive producer tier. Everything from the supporter tier and the executive tier, plus exclusive perks. Access to our treatment packages. Be the first to see which guests are coming up and get insight into the topics we'll be discussing before anyone else. And you'll even get an executive producer credit on every single documentary that we make. So if you've ever wanted to support the Mulligan Brothers mission of inspiring change so we can go around the world and get these stories that nobody else will, this is exactly how you do it. Go to patreon.com/Mulligan Brothers, or click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Join the community and help us inspire change.